curious about Heidegger's politics and his work and the relation between Heidegger and Levinas. So yeah, that's what I'll find you today.
What you're about to hear is a conversation that I had with Sue, who has been a subscriber at Theory Underground for about a year. He's a scholarship recipient for Tier 3. Tier 3 of the monthly membership has this office hours option for one-on-one consultations. We also go over lecture notes, potentially do exegetical readings. Basically, it's something that's supposed to help myself as well as the student go deeper into a subject matter that is one of the research threads at Theory Underground. So yeah, I think this one's important to share because it's a great conversation. We get into Heidegger and Levinas, and we have a Levinas course coming up here in August. It's coming up really soon, and so I figured I'd share it. Yeah, subscribers get access to the past courses and 90% off of the courses that I teach. And so the best way to be a part of the upcoming Levinas course or have access to the Being in Time course is to sign up as a monthly member. And with that, let's get to it. All right. So welcome, Sue, to this. I mean, we're really just doing office hours. How you doing, man?
Doing fine.
You got questions for me? What kind of questions do you have that we want to get into with these 40 minutes?
Well, I'm a bit concerned and curious about Heidegger's politics and his work and the relation between Heidegger and Levinas. So yeah, that's what I'll find you today.
Sweet. Well, so Levinas is what I really want to be talking about right now because he's the next big course that I'm teaching, obviously, at Theory Underground. Um, and you're taking that course, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And you also took the Being in Time course. And so, um, so so the questions about Heidegger's politics, I kind of want to start with that because obviously in the Being in Time series, I developed my thesis or a way of reading Heidegger's Being in Time and the proto-fascism that's there. So do you have questions about my interpretation? Do you need a refresher about it? Do you see problems with it? You know,
Yeah, I would still love to hear about your um expansion on the interpretation of the leeway that you um focused on, like through the whole lecture of Division Two, chapter 3 or chapter 4.
chapter 3 or chapter 4. Well, without looking at it right now, you say of the leeway. What do you? Could you go into that a little bit?
Because in one of your lectures, you said that the word leeway only appeared 6 times in his work, but is has a very important position in his politics. But I still don't understand what it really means. I don't understand what it means actually. So yeah, I just wanted to ask you about it.
Yeah, no, this is one of the interesting things about office hours is I don't remember almost anything I talk about in lectures unless I refresh myself, right? So, but let me bring up my Being in Time notes. So the word leeway only comes up a few times. And what is what is the significance of leeway? I don't remember this. Um Horizontal leeway is made clear to us by how something involved, but which we were not awaiting, is disclosed. It seems there's a waiting and retention that makes present versus awaiting and not retaining. Is this resignation? So that's page 407. That's my note on 407, which is enough to remind me a little bit about what we're talking about. But I think I know what I want to say, but let me check a couple of my other notes. Dasein makes room for its own leeway by reserving/occupying, representing space. We're thinking of it much less of ourselves as present at hand. How we take in space, making room for itself is constituted by directionality and disseverance, which is regionality and belonging, hither, thither, blah, blah, blah. Bring near. Okay, yeah. So it has to do with space. Definitely has to do with politics then. But also he talks about horizontal, directional, regional, dissevering leeway. Where we're going, fate will show freedom is the ability to see the situation and give up a definite resolution on page 443. Only by taking over the throne basis of its nullity can Dasein become free to choose. Thus, the moment of vision discloses the accidents of the situation. Freedom is choosing one possibility. This leeway comes to terms with the negation/loss of other possibilities. Indecision and keeping options open is not freedom. World horizon makes the present meaningful in reference to the future of having been. Fallen project, the present at hand upon future and past, the world, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't matter. So when you hear the word leeway, what do you think of?
Some space left.
Okay. I tend to think of, instead of it being some space left, it's more like the parameter. It's the space left, like you're saying, the space left, but within the parameters of a certain limitation. So if you were tied to a rope and then that rope was attached to the wall and you only had 3 feet of rope between you and the wall, that would be your leeway, is the ability to move those 3 feet in any direction from the wall. You couldn't move further from that, so your leeway is within those 3 feet. But then if we were to give you 30 feet of slack, you now have a lot more leeway. So it's the room within which you're able to move, because that space that is left by the parameters of the limitation. So the parameters of the limitation in that case would be 3 feet or 30 feet, right? And then the strict dictionary definition is the amount of freedom to move or act that is available, or the sideways drift of a ship or an aircraft to leeward of the desired course. Well, we mean the first definition, the amount of freedom to move or act that is available. So when it comes to spatiality and regionality, and bringing hither and thither and all of that with Heidegger, I think what he's getting at, and this was pretty much my position, I think, when I was teaching it, is that he's going against the idea that freedom is just the ability to choose infinitely. He wants to say that you have to choose a possibility. And I think that when you choose a possibility, it's kind of like you choose your rope. Like if you choose the rope that has 3 feet, well, then it comes with 3 feet of leeway. So it's like you've chosen something that brings limitation, but by bringing limitation, it gives you a definite sense of what's possible within those limitations. And so if you choose National Socialism like he did, well, then you're choosing what's possible within those parameters. So leeway, there's a different way of talking about leeway where it's just like you're thrown into the world as a, at some point you discover that you're an individual. You're able to start making choices on your own. This individualistic interpretation of Dasein would say that, you're being unto death makes it so that you're able to free yourself from Das Man, and you're able to then see what possibilities are your own most possibilities. Okay, that's the standard interpretation. But I think what Heidegger's doing with talking about leeway here is he's saying that you have to choose a definite possibility. That choosing a definite possibility gives you the leeway, right? Like you can't just kind of constantly do this and do that. You kind of have to choose something in particular. And then it plays into it's horizontal in the sense that it has to do with your horizon of possibilities. It's directional, meaning that it's always in, you always have directions ahead, behind, beside. And it's regional in the sense that like you're always occupying some space. And this space is existential space, which is not exactly the same as like a physical space, but I think that there's still a seed of what's going to, in his later work around 1932, 33, 34, develop into an argument that like Dasein has to have geopolitical space. Like Dasein needs geopolitical space. If it doesn't have geopolitical space, it can't exist as Dasein. And so like, from the Heideggerian standpoint, he'd probably say Jews and like their Dasein is like shattered because they're dispersed all over the world and they don't have a place. And so Heidegger would probably be down with Zionism, right? Most Nazis would be. Because, and I wouldn't just say most Nazis, I'd say most people who are nationalists, they believe that a people proper needs a nation proper, and that a nation proper has to have a geopolitical center for its power. Otherwise, it cannot exist. This is why you get Israelis who take from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, as a declaration of intent to wipe out the Jewish people. Because from the Zionist standpoint, if the Jewish people do not have a center for power, a homeland, then they're not really a people. They're a diaspora, but it's like they're dispersed all over the place. And that sort of collectivist Dasein concept would say that, your people needs to have a homeland and it needs to defend that homeland. Yeah. I do think that the seed of that is in here when he's talking about regionality and everything like that. So obviously that's like the sort of bridge into talking about his politics. So what kind of questions do you have from all of that? We've got about 25 minutes left here.
So space, and so Heidegger is basically trying to say that if Dasein wants to have the ability to choose their own possibilities, they need to have space.
Can you repeat that?
So Heidegger is trying to argue that in order for Dasein to choose their possibilities, they need to have space.
Yeah. I mean, if you didn't have space, which is to say leeway, then you would just be on a fixed path. Or it wouldn't even be a path at all. You would just be fully determined, right? Like space is like the metaphor that helps us think about uh freedom. Instead of standing there, I can stand here. So it's a good metaphor for thinking about freedom. But also, if you have infinite space to move within, then the coordinates of meaningful movement are completely lost. Infinite space isn't going to work. You do need limitations on your space. You need landmarks, right? And you need to be able to take up a position and then move over and take up another position. You need to be able to move around, right? Like, so the metaphor in terms of freedom, I think, makes a lot of sense. I would put a big question mark, personally, Sue. I would put a big question mark over what I'm saying when it comes to connecting space and basically geopolitical territory. I would put a big question mark over everything I'm saying because it's arguable. It's not like my interpretation on this is something I'm 100% confident on. And in fact, there's a piece that I need to read that I talked about with Todd recently that is arguing against my main sources for understanding the political Heidegger. So there are big arguments here, so I don't want to be too confident with you.
Hmm. Is there also any other place where Heidegger just talks about space and there's this political element in being and time?
In Being in Time, it's spread out. I think there's several different moments like that throughout Being in Time. I think I pointed them all out. I don't think it's just in chapter 4. Because chapter 4 comes after chapters 1 through 3 of Division 2, and because it comes before chapter 5 and 6, and chapter 5 is arguably the moment where the real Nazi sort of case develops. I think it's for him to be developing those ideas in chapter 4 means that chapters 1 through 3 were building up to that moment. Chapters 1 through 3 develop anticipatory resoluteness, right? One whole chapter on anticipation, one whole chapter on resoluteness, and then one whole chapter on bringing the two together for anticipatory resoluteness. Chapter 4 comes along and brings in historicality and this stuff about space, which doesn't mean too much until you get to chapter 5 when he starts talking about fate and destiny. So, you have to choose your fate. And by choosing your fate, you find yourself part of like a destiny with others. Well, that means that the chapters 1 through 3 of Division 2 that are traditionally understood as being the most existentialist, which means that people read it through this individualistic lens, that those chapters are actually building up to something that's not individualist. The only individualist part of it is freeing yourself from Das Man. But Das Man is not the same thing as your people. Like, Das Man is like the global homo culture. It's the it's the Gesellschaft instead of the Gemeinschaft, right? The Gesellschaft is like the broad society. The Gemeinschaft is like the more locally bound. And the Volksgemeinschaft is an idea that Heidegger is going to get into later. But also throughout the whole 1920s, Heidegger's like on the sly, super super into following these radical conservative journals. He's a big fan of Ernst Jünger. He's a big fan of Max Scheler. So so I get that Thomas Sheehan and Ian Thompson, and that those are both Heideggerians, Ian Thompson and Thomas Sheehan, and Todd McGowan, and the way he reads Thomas Sheehan, they kind of dismiss Richard Wolin. They dismiss Phi, who I've never read Phi before, but I understand Wolin draws from Phi. And so Wolin and Phi and Johannes Fritzsche are all developing this argument that Heidegger's philosophy is inherently Nazistic. Like inherently it's Nazistic. And I basically like their arguments. I just think they are too liberal. And by saying that they're too liberal, I don't think that they're really capable of saying sometimes, well, yeah, Heidegger's got his reactionary ideas baked through all of this, but also sometimes he's correct, which means that some true ideas could be reactionary. It's possible. I don't know that truth works in accordance with, progressive values all the time. Like I like the Nietzschean idea that there might be dangerous truths, which, I mean, we have to be open to that. Like we're not being critical or scientific at all if we're not open to that,
Yeah. Okay. Let's stop the Heideggerian there for a moment. Now, just curious about, because when we'll be having our Levinas course really soon, so just want to hear you talk about like how does Levinas treats Heidegger.
So Levinas is kind of known as being the opposite of Heidegger, or of being the moral critique of Heidegger, like the best moral critique of Heidegger. But with that said, I think he still has a profound respect for Heidegger. And but with that said, I think that Dr. Thompson, Ian Thompson, he would say that Levinas gets Heidegger wrong. So, does that, so there's this big question for us of, well, what is the correct Heidegger? And, is the way that he gets Heidegger wrong a problem for his own philosophy? I've got a couple of quotes that I want to read to you. First of all, so this is from Ethics and Infinity, which is an interview with Emmanuel Levinas. Philippe Nemo interviewed Levinas, and they put it together here. So there's a whole section on it called Heidegger. Philip Nemo says, when you came to Freiburg to follow Husserl's teaching, you discovered there a philosopher you did not know beforehand, but who would have a capital importance in the elaboration of your thought, Martin Heidegger. Levinas says, I discovered, in fact, Sein und Zeit, which is being in time, which people around me read. Very early, I had a great admiration for this book. It is one of the finest books in the history of philosophy. I say this after years of reflection. one of the finest among 4 or 5 others. Philip Nemo says, which ones? And he says, for example, Plato's Phaedrus, Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, Hegel's Phenomenology of Mind, also Bergson's Time and Free Will. My admiration for Heidegger is above all an admiration for Sein und Zeit. I always try to relive the ambience of those readings when 1933 was still unthinkable. There's a lot packed into this moment, and I kind of just wanted to highlight, first of all, you can see that he has this deep reverence and respect for being in time. His position is actually my position, which is that I don't really care about Heidegger, the person. I don't really care about Heidegger's bigger life project or his later philosophy. I am also an admirer of Being in Time. I think it's definitely one of those top 5 books, except instead of Plato's Phaedrus, I would probably say Plato's Republic is my favorite dialogue. And I haven't read Bergson's Time and Free Will, which is like, I really do need to read it. But his admiration coming through for Sein und Zeit is a really big deal. And then you see how that leads right there into, he says, I always try to relive the ambience of those readings when 1933 was still unthinkable. That means that there was a time when he was able to just be in the ambience of Being in Time, just being profoundly impacted by it and thinking it's the best book ever, unpolluted from Heidegger joining the Nazi Party. So before 1933, it was a lot easier to be a Heideggerian. So Levinas was a young philosopher. He's reading Being in Time and he's just like, oh, this is amazing. And he tries to relive those days because that was kind of like the best time to be alive in a sort of sense. Then in 1933, when Heidegger joins the Nazi Party and becomes rector of Freiburg University, Heidegger starts doing like these radio broadcasts, putting out announcements to students and to workers and telling them that they needed to ally themselves with the Nazi Party. He starts talking about full mobilization of the German people. He starts saying that people need to fight to defend German Dasein. He starts saying that German Dasein needs to expand and conquer other lands because basically he takes this sort of Spenglerian approach, which would say that a civilization is either growing or it's declining. And so the clash of nations is actually a good thing because you're either growing or you're going, and clashing means that you're growing into the borders of other people. And so then you clash it out and then you swallow them up, or you colonize them, you subjugate them in some way. And Heidegger thinks he's just being a realist. He's just being a realist when it comes to that. But that all comes from 1933 to 1934. After that point, it's impossible to think about Heidegger without the Nazism. But Levinas, nonetheless, still tries to remember those good old days, is kind of what he's saying. And then he goes on and on, but I'll just read a little bit of it. So he says, one speaks habitually of the word being as if it were a substantive, even though it is verb par excellence. In French, one says the being or a being. With Heidegger, verbality was awakened in the word being, that is, event in it. What is event in it? The happening of being. It is as if things and all that is set a style of being, made a profession of being. Heidegger accustomed us to this verbal sonority. This re-education of our ear is unforgettable, even if banal today. So it might be banal when Levinas is saying this, but it's not banal today for all of us because people have reverted right back into just kind of taking being to be substantive instead of more like a verb. This re-education of our ear is unforgettable, even if banal today. Philosophy would thus have been, even when it was not aware of it, an attempt to answer the question of the significance the signification of being as verb. While Husserl still proposed, or seemed to propose, a transcendental program for philosophy, Heidegger clearly defined philosophy in relation to other forms of knowledge as fundamental ontology. And, then they go on. And I would honestly say I would happily do an exegetical of this with you. But what other kinds of questions does this raise for you?
Like I how this it's like after Heidegger exposed that he's a Nazi, everyone who claimed to be influenced by Heidegger tries their best to just digest that part and to like either eliminate it, kill it, overcome it, or just emerge it into elsewhere. So how does Levinas responds to Heidegger's politics towards Nazism?
Good. Yeah, that's a great question. And so I think the short answer is to say he spends his whole life thinking about the relation between same and other. Now, same and other is not the same as saying individual self and other, because sorry, I'm trying to find the actual beginning of this book here. He says there's a dedication in Totality and Infinity that I think it needs to be read. Hold on. This ain't it. Here, let me go grab it.
Sure.
So I think probably the most important thing is that Husserl and Heidegger are the most important philosophers. They are philosophy par excellence for Levinas. And they both take fundamentally different positions on what is first philosophy, what is foundational, what is the first principle, what is the first experience, what is primordial, what is originary. This is something that they're both super preoccupied in. It's like a sort of foundationalism. And Husserl's foundationalism is going to be very, very Cartesian, which is like it's based on your certainty of your own existence, right? What would you say Heidegger's is? What is Heidegger's fundamental uh what comes first for Heidegger? What is his foundationalist sort of reduction in being and time?
Being.
Being. Being and arguably sense of being, right? Sense of being would be the meaning of being as opposed to just being. Or even we could say the question of being, or we could say the problem of being. I like how like Heidegger will often say something's not a discipline, something's not a field, it's a problem. What it is a problem. Um, and so I was just looking. I thought that Totality Infinity is dedicated to, you know, basically the survivors of the Shoah, right? The Holocaust. Um, but I can't find the dedication. But that doesn't matter. All of his thinking is a response to the Holocaust. So his young thought When he's young, he's just translating Husserl and Heidegger and engaging with their work. But then he joins the French resistance. He spends time in a German POW camp as a Jew. And it is there that he writes the little essay called Existence and Existence. Existence and existence is basically the difference between beings, I think, like rocks and trees and animals, and then like existence, like human existence, being in the world. And but what he does is he wants to show that whereas for Husserl, you take the subject to be first philosophy, and so phenomenology is a kind of epistemology. For Heidegger, it's being in the world, and the sense of meaning of being, or the question of being, but also like Dasein and worldhood are irreducible. You can't have a fundamental starting point of subjectivity without the position of the world itself, which is presupposed by Dasein. What? Okay, I'll be down in a sec. Got 4 more minutes to close this thing out. Yeah, I'll be right down. And so yeah, what we're sorry, I got to go in a sec, but basically, the short answer is Levinas. He's going to say that ethics is first philosophy. That the moral obligation to the other is first philosophy. That the most foundational thing that we know for certain is thou shalt not kill. That thou shalt not kill is more certain than I think, therefore I am. His whole project is going to be about that. That is his whole life's project. And the reason I pointed out that same versus other is not the same thing as subject versus other. It's not the same thing as individual self versus other. And that's because a group can have a sense for sameness. Oh, like the in group, we, us, what makes us the same, right? Well, when you start thinking about what makes us the same, it necessarily draws up like this opposite of what's other. So if you and I were to say, well, you might live in Hong Kong and I might live in Boise, Idaho, but we're the same insofar as we are kept awake by certain fundamental philosophical problems and questions and interested in certain philosophers and wanting to write and do all of these things. And so we have a sense of sameness that cuts across culture. Well, that invokes the opposite. The opposite is people who don't care about those things, people who don't care about philosophy, people who are anti-intellectual, people who don't care about writing, who don't care about the thinkers that we care about. And so as soon as we define a sameness, we have discovered an other. And as soon as we discover an other, we simplify all the complexity of other people into a sort of stereotype. And that simplified stereotype is really easy to talk shit about. It's really easy to use to prop ourselves up. And what we're doing when we simplify others into a category is totalization. We're erasing the infinite possibilities and qualitative differences between other people and who they are, what they can be. We're reducing all of that down into like these little boxes that prop up our own ego projects. And there's a violence inherent to that. That violence inherent to that is also a violence inherent to totalitarian ideology. It's also inherent to logic, to language, to cognitive processing itself. And so he's going to say that ethics is first philosophy, but basically all thinking and logic and science and rationality lends itself on this sort of slippery slope to the habit of reducing others into little boxes that we use to prop up our own egos through the process of what he calls totalization. And so when you see totality versus infinity, you should think about the box versus the human that overflows the box they are put into. But with that, I got to go, man. This was really fun. I'm glad we
Yeah,
did this.
yeah, it was very fun.
Let's do a follow-up soon. Maybe get a hold of either the digital version of this, Ethics in Infinity, or the physical, and then we could go over some of it next time.
Sure. But like when what's the frequency that we can do something like this?
I can't promise anything further than a month out, but I can say that this month we could do it as early as next week or the following week.
Sure. Then I'll message you like a few days later.
Sweet.
And maybe we can make some time. Sweet. Yeah. Have a nice day.
All right. Thank you. Peace.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, a place for workers with earbuds who are tired of the bullshit and just want to get down to it. Big ideas, rigorous thinking, and ultimately liberation from necessity.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation. Theory of the subject, capital, time-energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
Theory Underground is coming to a city near you. Besides a commitment to publishing certain underground theorists and popularizing certain fundamental concepts, we have toured the United States and are touring Europe to promote our ideas, courses, and publications. You've been reading Underground Theory.
Amazing book. I'm a publisher and an editor. I run a review of books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Okay, picture this scene. America, early 2021. An Amazon warehouse worker arises from the emerging underground theory internet scene to create spaces for untimely topics and concerns that are too often neglected or kept in isolation today. Joined by a revolving cast of underground theorists, academics, and critics, he establishes what will become Theory Underground, a teaching, research, and publishing platform by and for working-class intellectuals, autodidacts, and academics who want to do more than they're able to do within the confines of academia. That warehouse worker's name is David McKerracher, and his book Timenergy is his first major contribution to the world of theory. It was recently reprinted with a foreword by none other than Slavoj Žižek, who also contributed to Theory Underground's latest book.
My Bible, it's an excellent book.
A collection of essays called Underground Theory.
What you just heard is an excerpt from the Strange Exiles podcast, episode 23, where Bram from Strange Exiles interviewed me and Mikey. For those who don't know, Mikey is the author of the Dangerous Maybe blog. We are publishing one of his books here shortly at Theory Underground. He's also a lecturer at Theory Underground, and he's someone I've been friends and a collaborator with for over 10 years. But most importantly for you all, he's a fantastic lecturer, and it's a crime that he has to do wage labor right now. One of the long-term goals of Theory Underground has been now for a couple of years to hashtag free Mikey. That is something that I've been really pushing, but first, obviously, I have to get freed myself, so the two of us are able to do this because, as Mikey said, build it and they will come. Well, I tried and I built a website and platform. I had my own app and everything, but it's been really buggy and it's more than one person can handle, and that's, a really good lesson for me. And so for now, what we're doing is moving it to a temporary intermediary platform until we are able to get some more serious funding. And ultimately, we want to be in a place like this, a real brick and mortar digital nomadic mecca where people can come from all over the world. But also, the app was really expensive, and so by quitting it, I am now able to save a lot of money, and with the help of my patrons and the students at Theory Underground, especially the monthly subscribers, I am officially able to quit Amazon and do Theory Underground full time. So thank you so much, everybody. This is one huge step forward With that said, several subscribers did not migrate from the now defunct app to the new setup, and I'm guaranteed to lose people over time. So please, if you want to get involved, become a subscriber. If you're not even sure what this is all about but are just curious, then I've added Tier 0 and Tier 1 for very basic kinds of access to what we are doing behind the scenes. If you don't have any time or energy to get involved, but you do have some money to help support this project from afar, then please check out the Patreon. My patrons over at Patreon make the podcast and public YouTube possible. Thank you. As for once-in-a-lifetime events, check out the new poster for the American Idiots Theory Underground European Book Tour. Paris, Brussels, Berlin, Vienna, Linz, Krakow, Glasgow, London, and Oxford from April 27th to May 25th, 2024. 2 events are already fully booked out. Save a seat at an event by getting in contact with us ASAP. Finally, the call for proposals to our conference in Mexico.
What's up, everybody? TUCon 2024 update here. It's not happening in Mexico anymore, but it is still happening on October 24th through the 27th.
The change was made because a lot of the people that wanted to attend and that were expected to attend said they could probably afford to travel if they had more time advance notice. So save up for June 2025.
If you have to choose, right? Because this one that is happening this year is happening physically in Boise, Idaho, because we have a lot of collaborators and fellow travelers and co-instructors there. But you can attend virtually for this one. You won't be able to attend virtually next year. So yeah, if you have to choose, attend physically in 2025. The call for proposals already happened. The writing workshop for proposals already happened. You can still get the links to both of those. Just shoot us a message and ask for those links. We'll get you those. And the form goes live on June 1st, and the deadline is June 15th. So if you're attending physically, let me know ASAP.
Get in on it.
All right. Finally, last little thing here is to say thank you so much to my patrons over at Patreon. The Patreon is for people who are too busy to be students or subscribers at Theory Underground, but who want to see more of this free content on the podcast and YouTube channel for Theory Underground. You are the ones who see something of value in the free content being made available here, and you want to see more of it. Your patron pledges at Patreon are a real motivator for me, so thank you so much. Especially thanks to Marilyn Lawrence, Bert Vanderkar, Carl Vanderlip, Nikolai, Sahil Kumar, Zuxandra, Darian Large, Tyler Murphy, Max Mackin, Al, Algeri, Ben Rosenblum, Atlantic Airlines, Lewis, Matt Payne, Neil C., Simon Condon, Yiz, and Schwabkinson. Thank you.